In the upcoming interview, we set the clock back to 2005 and take a peek at the Anatomy of a Disaster, a video produced by the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board. The purpose of our dialogue is to learn from this video and help businesses formulate productive and sustainable decisions. The video is based on millions of pages of facts, and by looking back, we try to wrestle with topics like corporate responsibility, human capital management, and rational decision-making for the greater good of our world. Featured in this interview, Mr. Brian Blazina collects meaningful thoughts about what systems thinking is and how it can be applied across varied contexts. Mr. Blazina has over 20 years of business leadership experience as a general manager, regional business segment leader, country general manager, president, and CEO in the energy industry. His ongoing education includes the Executive Development Program at Kellogg School of Management, and he has earned his MBA concentration in marketing from Ahua College of Business, Cleveland State University, with a BBA in Management and Computer Science from Kent State University. He is currently president and CEO at NRAM, Energy Resources America, an energy consulting, education, investment, and trade company. Brian formerly worked for Castrol, Air BP, Global Aviation, BP, and Standard Oil, where his functional work experience spans marketing and sales, business development, trading and control, supply and distribution operations, organizational transformation, strategy development and execution, budgeting and planning. Mr. Blazina led or collaborated with various teams on projects with capital impact from $10 million to $2 billion. Brian guest lectures at graduate management schools at universities in the U.S. and Asia on leadership, ethics, supply chain, marketing, project management, and transportation. And speaking of transportation, Brian has traveled to China and Vietnam over the last 5 years, helping current and future leaders learn primarily about Western business leadership and ethics. He provides special presentations, serves on expert panels, and is actively involved in the community. Brian served in nonprofit community leadership roles such as chairman of the American Cancer Society's Walk and Roll fundraising event held in Chicago annually with over 4,000 participants, and the Kent State University Alumni Board of Directors. Mr. Blazina's years of experience in the energy industry paved the way for us to better understand the importance of correct decision-making and how to manage with the law of unintended consequences in mind. In preparing for this segment, our interviewer points to some fundamentally sound ideas that can be used as a guide to continuous improvement in any organization, be they simple or complex. We'll see how Mr. Hamid Hank Noorani, the author of Rational Decision Making and Power, the Modern Doctrine, demonstrates the application of the tools of systems thinking. Mr. Noorani is also the founder and president of Powerful Methods, whose mission is to develop a new generation of leaders who serve the world by inspiring ordinary people to produce extraordinary results. Slated for discussion, we find helpful tools to overcome barriers, ideas to build a culture of self-regulation, ways to optimize cost-benefit decisions, communication, leadership of organizational systems, practical lessons, and how to make the ideas work for you. This dialogue is based on Power, the Modern Doctrine, designing a better life, building enduring, productive relationships and organizations.
I'm going to discuss a video of the BP Texas City refinery explosion incident that killed and injured many people. Then ask Hamid Noorani to discuss how his book and philosophy, Power, the Modern Doctrine, has real-life application to a real-life incident.
Brian, I very much welcome your questions on this modern philosophy of systems thinking, and I congratulate you for your interest in it, and I'm sure together we can open new applications for students, for faculty, members, for business leaders, and also for those who set public policy. Because the principles of systems thinking actually have universal application. And I welcome the opportunity of exploring those applications with you.
I would like to mention that this is not an exercise in targeting BP, but to discuss how the principles of the power, the modern doctrine, might help companies facing similar situations. I worked at BP with many wonderful people, and my heart goes out to those who were harmed by this terrible incident. Hopefully this discussion and the associated training programs can benefit all companies, both in manufacturing and other sectors, to become more effective, efficient, safe, and, as your book espouses, profitable. The video was done by the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board, also known as the Chemical Safety Board, or CSB. This is one of the best safety videos I've seen, and suggested viewers go to the link provided or Google CSB video of BP Texas City explosion, click on Anatomy of Disaster, and watch the entire 55-minute video. No more time than a TV documentary. Part of this video, the first part, runs about 3 minutes and introduces the overall incident.
At 1:20 p.m. on March 23, 2005, a massive explosion and fire erupted at the BP refinery in Texas City, Texas. The explosion killed 15 workers and injured 180 others, many of them seriously. The blast occurred at the isomerization, or ISOM unit, which produces materials to boost the octane rating of gasoline. The explosion shattered windows in homes and businesses up to 3/4 of a mile away from the 1,200-acre refinery. As thick black smoke billowed from the plant, authorities instructed some 43,000 Texas City residents to stay indoors. The accident cost BP billions of dollars in victims' compensation, property damage, and lost production.
This investigation was the largest and most comprehensive investigation in the history of the Chemical Safety Board.
CSB Supervisory Investigator Don Holmstrom led a 2-year investigation to determine the root causes of the accident.
We interviewed over 370 witnesses. We looked at thousands of documents, literally millions of pages of documents, and we examined the plant, inspected over 40 pieces of instrumentation and equipment.
The investigation team examined a wide range of safety systems, practices, and standards, and looked at human factors such as fatigue and communication between operators. The board's report was released at a public meeting in Texas City on March 20, 2007. Then CSB Chairman Carolyn Merritt presided.
Many of you here tonight had family members or co-workers who were victims of this explosion. To all of you, I express my deepest condolences and sincere wishes that society never allows another accident like this to occur.
The tragedy at BP was the worst industrial accident in the United States in nearly 15 years. The CSB concluded that it was the result of organizational and safety deficiencies at all levels of the company. We found that BP management had, for many years, overlooked warning signs of a possible catastrophic accident.
There's an old saying that if you think safety is expensive, try an accident. Accidents cost a lot of money, and they're not only in damage to plant and in claims for injury, but also in the loss of the company's reputation.
The reason why the Texas City accident has such an impact is because when people look at it, they can see that they are all in the same boat, that the problems which led to that accident are likely to be present at other sites around the world.
My fear is that some of the other refineries within the United States will feel that couldn't happen to me. And the ones that feel that that couldn't happen at their site is the ones that are set up to have it happen there.
In respect to that video, Hamid, Here we have a massive incident. Many people die, get injured, and we likely have many simple and complex issues involving both the leadership and the employees leading up to the incident. Before getting into details, how in general does your book and philosophy, Power, the Modern Doctrine, apply here in a way that not only manufacturing leaders but other leaders can understand?
The modern philosophy of systems thinking actually highlights our broader goals, and it shows us that we are not just pursuing one goal, but we really need to pursue multiple goals at the same time. But one of the things it does is that it highlights our ultimate goal as society. The ultimate goal of the society is sustained prosperity. We form society. Society is a technology. We form societies, we form organizations as tools of productivity. But what we are trying to achieve at the end of the day is sustained prosperity. And how do we get there? We get there through value creation and optimization. And how do we get through value creation and optimization? It's through productivity and through the community and through personal growth. So we have a sequence of steps that we are taking in order to achieve the ultimate goal of sustained prosperity. So when organizations pursue just one goal of profitability, they are on the wrong track. But it is understandable why the one goal of profitability is so appealing to organizations. Because the goal of profitability is quantifiable, verifiable, and tangible. And when you are pursuing one goal, you can focus all your effort on achieving this one goal rather than trying to shoot multiple targets at the same time. But life is not like that. Life does not give you just one goal. Organizations have three goals. They have to meet at the same time. Organizations' number one goal is survival, and profitability definitely helps with that. Number two goal is growth in terms of their performance, not just in terms of size, but in terms of performance, how effective they are in adding value to the society, and how efficient they are in terms of adding that value with the minimal intake of resources. So the goal of profitability also helps with growth. But in addition to these two goals, organizations ought to have a mission. Why are we here? What is our, as the French put it, raison d'être? What is the reason for being? This is very important because it actually helps establish cohesion within the organization. So when members of an organization are loyal, they are not just loyal to a legal entity as the organization, they are loyal to that mission. It is that mission that solicits the loyalty and the corporate citizenship of the employees. And it is that mission that brings the employees to view each other as valuable members of the society. It is that mission that allows the members of the organization to actually streamline their value, their interactions together to create the maximum value. So some people may think that the mission is a fuzzy thing that you cannot express in your annual report, you cannot measure it, it's not tangible, and therefore it should be of no value. Whereas systems thinking shows that there are a number of goals you need to pursue that are not tangible, quantifiable, and verifiable. For example, corporate social responsibility is one of those goals. Ethics, morality is one of those goals. Sometimes you do not know the full scope of the impact that you leave behind on the environment, on the community, on the world at large.
Some companies can tick the box on all those items. They have a mission, they have corporate social responsibility. They appear to have everything that's required. How does that compare in a situation where a major incident occurs, what is missing?
Organizations have to set standards for themselves. What is their first responsibility? And a perfect example of this is with Johnson & Johnson company with their credo. If you read the Johnson & Johnson credo, it says our first responsibility is to mother, fathers, doctors, nurses, patients. That is our first responsibility. Our second responsibility is to our employees. The last responsibility is to our shareholders. This is very important to discuss because legally organizations as profit entities have a legal obligation to pursue shareholder value.
Yes, but pursuing the shareholder value in the Johnson & Johnson case, making sure they take care of the father and the mother and the children, doesn't that result in taking care of the shareholders?
You're exactly right. If we set a goal regardless of the process, then we are leaving ourselves open to taking the wrong process in pursuit of achieving the goal. And at the end, missing the goal altogether. So you cannot really set just outcome goals. You also need to set process goals. You cannot just live purely by process goals because you need outcomes in order to achieve your survival, growth, and the mission. Those outcomes have to be there. But you cannot ignore process goals. How do we do that? You have to set certain parameters for it.
So in other words, how do you assure delivery?
That's right.
There's another question here. In your book, you discuss how tools make a process go forward and barriers hold a process back. Sounds simple enough. How might that apply here?
Again, sometimes we use barriers as tools. For example, you are driving your car. The brake in your car is a barrier. It stops your car from going. Some organizational theories may say, wait a minute, we don't want the car to stop. We want a car to go. Why do we have a brake? And they don't realize that the purpose of the car is not just to go, but to transport you safely to your destination. And the brake is an integral part of that process. And without that barrier, without that brake, there is no way for you to transport yourself safely to your destination.
In other words, you might get in an accident on the way
That's exactly
to
That's
your
exactly
event.
right. We need to understand why are we doing something in the first place? Why are we doing anything? And systems thinking, actually, one of the values it offers is that it lays out the hierarchy of objectives that you need to follow. And these are rational objectives. You cannot deviate. For example, the goal of sustained prosperity, you cannot sacrifice that for any other goal, because then you are sacrificing your future.
And that's self-explanatory in that it's a longer term.
That's right. So this is another tension for organizational leaders to manage between short-term goals and long-term goals. Some cultures, such as Asian cultures, they only think long-term. Some cultures, such as American culture, only think short-term. And if you tell them why, they say, well, Wall Street wants their quarterly results higher than the previous quarter results, and every year profitability has to go straight up. You are sacrificing the cohesion of the organization. You are losing sight of why the organization exists in the first place. Shareholders have an interest. They became shareholders for the profit, and profit is a legitimate goal, is a necessary goal, but it's not the only goal.
And sometimes the other goals that might not appear to please a shareholder may actually deliver sustained value to the shareholder.
That's right. But then it's a question of legal obligations of the organization. And for that reason, recently there is a movement to allow organizations to register themselves as benefit organizations, or B Corp, which gives them legal protection against lawsuits by shareholders, that if they are not purely pursuing shareholder value, then the shareholders cannot legally sue them. Those shareholders are investing in these companies knowing that the company, while pursuing the goal of profitability, also at the same time recognizes and pursues its broader obligations to its employees, to its customers, to its community, to the world at large.
Interesting point. In your book, you discuss how a more manageable system requires actually less intervention to achieve the desired benefit. What do you mean in the context to a situation that might evolve to a major disaster, and on the surface you would think would require much greater intervention?
The video that you cited talks about process engineering. And in process engineering, companies have learned to establish standard operating procedures. So standard operating procedures on its face may be viewed as a barrier because it requires you to follow prescribed steps in the right sequence in order to achieve the outcome. But if you manage operations, say even in a chemical plant that has a standard operating procedures, it actually serves as a tool for productivity because it eliminates deviations of the process. So we talk about total quality management, Six Sigma. They're all trying to reduce or narrow process variations, and the standard operating procedures actually does precisely that. Through standard operating procedures, you allow the organization to learn from its previous experiences and redesign its process in such a way that achieves the desired outcome in the shortest interval of time and with the least amount of resources, creating the least amount of errors. In fact, a well-written standard operating procedure would make it impossible to make errors. Japanese firms have a term called pokiyoki. Pokiyoki is a quality term which means you make it foolproof. A standard operating procedure written well, coupled with a well-designed process, will actually make it impossible to make mistakes. And therefore, you're narrowing the product variation, you're narrowing your process variations, creating higher quality product, which actually reduces your cost according to the Taguchi function. The narrower the variation in the process, the narrower the variation in the output, the lower the cost.
Another part of the video talks about the perils of cost-benefit decisions in all companies. And in this case, a company with a very complex manufacturing process.
The CSB found that cost-cutting, production pressures, and failure to invest significantly impacted the process safety performance at the Texas City refinery and left the refinery vulnerable to catastrophe.
After the merger with Amoco, BP ordered a 25% reduction in fixed costs at all its refineries.
This impacted important process safety systems such as staffing, training, and mechanical integrity.
The effects of the budget cuts became apparent in a number of internal BP documents made public following the accident. In one, the refinery manager was quoted as having observed in 2002 that the infrastructure at Texas City was in complete decline. He ordered a study of the refinery's safety and mechanical integrity, a study which was shown to BP executives in London. That study warned of serious concerns about the potential for a major site incident following more than 80 hydrocarbon releases in the previous 2 years. The study also concluded that its own findings were urgent and far-reaching. A follow-up BP study in 2002 found the refinery's integrity and reliability issues were clearly linked to the reduction in maintenance spend over the last decade. In 2003, a maintenance assessment stated that cost-cutting measures have intervened with the group's work to get things right. Usually, reliability improvements are cut. And later that year, A company audit found the current condition of the infrastructure and assets is poor at Texas City, and that maintenance spending was limited by a checkbook mentality.
Hamid, your book shares in the philosophy of companies which are very capitalistic goals, seeking profit, controlling spending, expectation of benefit for every cost, etc. Where does it apply in this or similar situations, or where does a company come off the rails in pursuit of its goals and objectives to make a profit?
That's a great question, Brian, because the idea of cost versus benefit analysis is really the foundation of economics. In economics, you know that for every benefit you pursue, you have to sacrifice something else. Why? Because your time is limited, your resources are limited. If you do, by the virtue of pursuing one course of action, you are foregoing the opportunity of pursuing alternative courses of action. So for every action, you should expect a benefit. And if there is no benefit, then you are wasting resources, you are wasting opportunities, and which is enormous amount of cost. So generally, you can actually draw down the diagram of the cost of an action that is leading to a benefit. And then you can define irrational actions. Irrational actions are those that have higher cost than benefit. The wonderful thing about irrational actions is that they are not sustainable. People do all kinds of irrational behavior and try to justify it for themselves. But to paraphrase Shakespeare, failure by any other name is just as costly. And it is that high cost that eventually brings people to change course. So for example, you mentioned the incident at the BP Texas City refinery. The cost of that incident is going to bring people to start thinking that maybe we need to change course. We cannot continue.
Whenever you have an incident like this, believe it or not, it does have some benefits to both the company where it happened as well as other companies and other industries, because now there's values that can be placed on the risks. The probability of a major incident might be low, but if it does happen, the cost can be in the billions.
That's right. This is the other thing. When you evaluate risk of any action, you have two variables. You got the probability of something going wrong, or the consequence of something going wrong. And you have to, risk is multiplying both these variables. What is the probability times the consequence? Likewise, if you are pursuing an opportunity as an investment, you have to multiply the probability of getting your return times the magnitude of return. Irrational actions, when the cost is greater than benefit, these are destructive actions, because you are taking something of greater value and converting it into something of a lesser value.
Is an example of that, let's say at any kind of manufacturing facility, you could have high-level alarms and other instrumentation that could show a major problem's about to occur that maybe aren't functioning properly or need to be replaced. Is that considered an irrational action?
Well, the high-level alarm is actually warning you that there is something wrong. But you need to analyze that. Why is something wrong? Is the equipment malfunctioning? Is the process malfunctioning? Or is there a variation in the process that we have not anticipated and we have not adjusted for? Once the production is down, that is a cost, because you still have to pay all your fixed cost.
So if you have a problem that requires immediate repair and shutting down of units at a plant.
That's right. That's going to cost a fortune. Those costs actually measured per hour for a large plant could run into thousands of dollars per hour. These are not a small cost.
Right.
And the other cost is that while you are fixing the equipment at the plant, you are not meeting your customer's needs, which means your customer may go to your competition, which means you've got a cascade of cost involved that often is not totaled and used for evaluating your next initiatives.
How does an incident happen in the simplest of terms, okay? Is it the probability that gets attached to whether a broken instrument will cause a problem or a warning alarm won't go off? What exactly is this in terms that people can understand?
Well, you built in Poka-Yoke, you want your operation to become foolproof. So if an operator or somebody makes a human error, you want a backup alarm that something is wrong, take action quickly. Or you interlock the equipment so that it's physically impossible to actually make an error. That's the best way. Or if you have instrumentation, you always want backup. For example, are you sure your instrument is well calibrated? It's just like you're driving. You're relying on your senses in order to alert you to when you need to take corrective action. So you're using all your senses. You're using your sight, you're using your hearing, you're making sure that you're aware of your environment and everything that is going around you so that you spot risk early enough to allow you to take corrective action.
So the same kinds of things you discuss could occur in a financial institution, in a hospital?
That's right. So you need to have a backup measures. You have to measure all your outcome variables, but in addition to that, you need to measure all your process variables. Because in terms of learning, let me take you through the process of learning because that makes the system explanation a lot easier. So in the process of learning, you're taking an action on a process, on a system. And you're converting an input into an output, and this conversion takes place through the system parts, processes, and structures. And everything is happening in some context, physical context. And your physical context is influencing your business system, and your business system also is influencing the larger context.
We're learning some physics here, aren't we?
That's exactly right. It's all about physics. In order to see how your process is functioning, you need to make measurement. You not only need to make output measurements, you also need to make input measurements. What do you do with these measurements? You compare these with your objectives. And the comparison of your output measurements and input measurements with your objectives give you an effect. You're either exceeding objectives or falling behind it or hitting on target. Either case is opportunity for learning. But in order to identify the cause, you need to make process measurements. Without process measurements, there is no way to identify the cause of that effect. So while you are operating, you need to measure your output and the input, but also constantly measuring key variables in your process that allow you later on identify the cause of each effect. Because only then you are in a position to identify what new action you need to take. Because learning means changing behavior. And in order to change behavior, you need to identify the causes of effects. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And it's good that people were learning a little bit of physics without knowing it, because that makes them a little more open to systems thinking. How does your philosophy that cost is opportunities foregone apply here?
We discussed the cost versus benefit. Both benefit and cost are actually rather difficult to measure. And both of them have to be measured in the context of where you want to generate that benefit. Cost in economics means opportunities foregone. It includes everything that you sacrifice in pursuit of a benefit. And you're sacrificing a lot. Most people do not even take into account what they are sacrificing in terms of their health, in terms of their family's health, in terms of their relationships, because it's not quantifiable. Anything that is not measurable is very difficult to factor in as cost. In economics, we try to find ways to quantify all foregone opportunities based on dollars. And economists have found all kinds of novel ways of doing that. But for businesses, it's a difficult concept to handle. In financial accounting, for example, you have the one of the concepts you have there is the money measurement concept, which means accounts can recognize only those facts that can be expressed in monetary terms. And much of your opportunities foregone cannot be expressed in monetary terms. Although from system perspective, you know they are there. You cannot ignore it. You cannot ignore that there are implicit costs involved, there are missed opportunities involved, that you have to evaluate that. Is this benefit that you are pursuing really worth everything that you are sacrificing?
You also mentioned assessing needs, wants, threats, opportunities. How does the perception of leaders and employees impact these four categories of the economic rational model?
One of the things that your decision does is it shapes your future options. Every decision that you take, if it's a major decision, it impacts your future options. It either restricts your future options or it expands your future options. And what you want to do, you want to make decisions that really expand your future options. And in terms of decision making, I will show you a slide here. From systems thinking, methodic rational model means that you follow a specific process in making your decisions. This goes counter to our current corporate culture. Our current corporate culture looks for leaders who are decisive, which means they just jump in there and make a choice and then ask everybody to follow it.
And in some cases, it can be somebody with a very strong, dominating personality.
That's right. But that doesn't mean you're making a rational decision. That doesn't mean that whatever you do is going to bring you benefits that are worth the cost. In order to achieve benefits worth the cost, you need to follow a sequence of activities. Long before you come to implementation, you need to go situation analysis, whether you're going to decide to act, how to make a decision. And once you make your choice, before even planning to implement it, you need to test your decision for rationality. Does this decision give us the desired benefit? Is the benefit come at an affordable cost? But in addition to that, you have broader tests of rationality. So how do you test whether your decision is rational? Is the selected course of action the optimum response to the situation? Do I get the maximum benefit for the lowest cost? Highest benefit for the lowest cost? Are the costs affordable and manageable? If the costs are not affordable, regardless how wonderful the benefit might be, you can't afford it. Are the risks affordable and manageable? If you cannot afford the risk, that is not the decision for you.
Now that's a major area where you could have some misguided goals or rationalizing take place to take maybe more risk or attach less risk to a outcome based on the view of somebody in your organization or goals that are maybe a little off base.
That's right, because the first goal of management is survival of the organization. And we saw that. Second goal is growth. Not the first goal, second goal. Because if you don't survive, if the organization does not survive, everything else is irrelevant. So when you say there are risks involved with that strategic initiative or major decision that you are taking, you have to ask yourself, can the organization survive if everything goes wrong?
So in that decision model you showed, of course you're not going to do that to decide whether you would need to get a cup of coffee, but when you're making a major decision,
that's right,
changing a direction,
that's right,
or whatever, it might be good to trust something else other than just yourself or a couple of close individuals by going through some kind of rigorous process.
This actually process shows you that there is a sequence you need to go through, and it's very interesting because when you are generating options, here in this step 3.6, what you want to do is to do divergent thinking, which means open your mind to all possible options. Consider everything. not just whatever worked in the past, but all the other options out there. And then when you come to screening your options, you do convergent thinking, which means you're going to focus which of those options actually meets with your objectives, which ones don't. Without first doing divergent thinking, your number of options will be very limited.
How does decision-making occur for investment decisions in a way that can prevent such a disaster as we had in Texas City, or other major incidents?
Investment decisions for financial investment are more gamble than investment. There is a distinction between gambling and investment. Both gambling and investment involve risk and reward, and for that reason, many people fail to see the distinction between them. And this is why we say here the risk has to be manageable. In gambling, your risk is not manageable. In gambling, you cannot control the outcome. You have no control on the outcome. You have no control on the probability.
You might think you do.
You might think you do, but you have no control. So when the financial industry says we are investing in, derivatives, they are actually gambling. For that reason, because they have no control. They have no control on risk. They say, oh, but we are going to hedge our risk by betting another counter bet. It doesn't work.
A derivative of a derivative.
That's right. But in terms of a plant, in terms of a manufacturing plant, when you make investment, you have some control on the risks through training people, training of the personnel, through following standard operating procedures, through following best practices. You're minimizing your risk. There may be some residual risk that you cannot manage, but at least you minimize it, you reduce it, and you reduce the probability of the incident taking place. It may still happen for reasons beyond your control, but at least you minimize the probability.
Another part of the video shows how communication and leadership can impact organizational systems thinking. Again, note here that while complex, the incident investigation shows the need for some very basic principles that organizations and leaders can learn and master quickly, regardless of their business.
During 2004, the Texas City refinery had 3 major accidents. In addition to this process unit fire that caused $30 million in damage, 2 other accidents in 2004 resulted in 3 fatalities. Yet this same year, the refinery had its lowest ever recordable injury rate, a statistic that does not include fatalities. The CSB found that maintenance spending increased between 2003 and 2004. But most of the increases were for responding to serious accidents and complying with environmental requirements, not for preventive maintenance. Late in 2004, the Texas City refinery manager made a presentation to supervisors titled Safety Reality, reviewing fatalities at the plant over the past 30 years. One of the slides was entitled, Texas City is not a safe place to work.
BP did its own safety culture survey that was done just prior to the accident. That survey indicated there was an exceptional degree of fear among employees of a major catastrophe.
Among the findings of the survey, the pressure for production, time pressure, and understaffing are the major causes of accidents at Texas City. Critical events, like failures or breakdowns, are generally not attended to. Production and budget compliance gets recognized and rewarded above anything else. Sociology professor Dr. Andrew Hopkins has written extensively on the causes of industrial disasters.
My feeling is that the solution to this problem of cost-cutting by senior people is to hold them responsible for the safety implications of those cost cuts, so that when they order a cost cut, they should personally be able to certify that these things will not have adverse safety consequences.
The Safety Culture Survey also pointed to the exceptionally high executive turnover at the refinery. 6 different business unit leaders, or BULs, in 7 years prior to the accident. The authors of the survey report concluded, "We have never seen an organization with such a history of leadership changes over such a short period of time."
Many managers are in and out within a space of 2 years, and what they are assessed on the basis of is the profit they make on an annual basis. Now, am I, as a manager, am I going to spend a large amount of money to deal with some remote risk that is very unlikely to generate a major accident during my year or two on my watch here?
Your book, Power, the Modern Doctrine, says clear expression comes from clear thoughts. How might that apply to the Texas City incident or at other companies where you have continuous leadership changes, for example?
Leaders need to make rational resolutions. There are certain principles derived from systems thinking that are universal. And the moment you assume the position of leadership in any organization, you really need to ask yourself these questions. You need to love all and wish no one ill. That is the first step.
That sounds a little lovey-dovey, don't you think?
Well, not as it relates to the incident at British Petroleum Texas City incident, because when you are making decisions on safety equipment, investment in safety equipment versus the lives that can be at risk, this principle, this resolution will guide you.
So in other words, the act of assuring that there's no harm done,
That's right.
which is a leadership and ethics principle, do no harm, very simple one, is kind of an expression of caring for
It's more than
your
that.
people.
You are resolving to actually commit to the well-being of all your employees. You are resolving to commit to the well-being of every one of your customers. You are resolving to commit to the well-being of everyone in the community. You are resolving to commit to the future generations, to the unborn. You are committing to the well-being of the world beyond.
In a way you are,
That's right.
if you truly care.
And not only that, but that is good business.
In
Down-
the end, yeah,
That's
I
right.
think people would agree, but of course that's always, after an incident. But we do have good examples out there where the right things were done, and you mentioned Johnson & Johnson when they had the Tylenol scare.
That's right.
Removing all the product
right.
out of all of the stores.
That's
and
right.
all over, at every location.
That's right. And the CEO at the time, when he was asked what guided that decision, and he said it was the credo. Johnson & Johnson's credo that guided that decision. That you are loving all, wishing no one ill. You don't want anybody get ill. You don't want anybody get hurt. And by not wishing anyone get hurt, you actually do what is best for the organization.
Because there is a cost, a significant cost, if somebody
It's a
gets
significant.
harmed.
That's right. There is a cost of action. There is a cost to no action. No action also brings opportunities for God. So if the CEO at the time had not taken any action and somebody else got ill, well, no, that would really tarnish the image of the entire company. But by taking action, in fact, it improved the image of the company to the world. In fact, it improved the image of employees within Johnson & Johnson of each other, which is very important in establishing organizational cohesion.
You mentioned empathy. Is that what we're talking about here? How might empathy have helped in a Texas City situation, and how might it help at other companies? What is empathy here?
Yes, some people mistake the meaning between empathy and sympathy. So we first need to clarify the distinction. Sympathy means you feel what somebody else feels. Empathy means you don't necessarily feel what somebody else feels, but you understand why that person feels the way they do.
So and the only way you can understand is to venture to find out what their needs are, what their concerns are.
It comes from maturity. It comes from experience. That executive making investment decisions, say, on safety equipment on a chemical plant, if they have their own children working in that plant, they say, oh, I don't want my children to get hurt. Well, there's one decision. But even if they don't have any family member, and maybe they're sitting in a different country making decisions for chemical plant in somewhere else, they should at least see my family members work in places that I hope would safeguard their health and safety.
So perhaps that's an exercise in learning what empathy is. You just put one of your own family members into a situation, even if you visualize this, and think about the situation in those terms.
That's right. Anybody that is hurt could have been your family member, direct family member, could have been your neighbor, could have been your friend, could have been someone you know. Would you do this behavior on your family member, friends, and those you know? If you don't do it on the family members, your friends and relatives, don't do it to anyone else.
You also mention in your book that in leadership, persuasion means convincing someone to spend power in a particular way for a particular benefit. So how might that approach help at a Texas City, and how might it help other companies improve?
A couple of these points actually touch on that. Resolving to learn is a very important decision. At the end of the day, the greatest sin any professional can commit is not learning from their experiences. Mistakes happen. We all make mistakes. But as professionals, we ought to strive to make only new mistakes, not old ones. If they are making old mistakes, if they are failing to learn, the failure to learn is the ultimate sin anyone can commit, because there is so much at stake.
The survey of Texas City employees also found concern about safety and equipment checks potentially left undone.
There was a check-the-box mentality, which indicated that personnel would go through the motions with various policies and procedures, but the work would not be conducted.
For example, the tower high-level alarm had been reported as not functioning several times in the 2 years prior to the accident. But maintenance work orders for this alarm were closed, although the repairs were never actually made.
Work orders could be closed out as completed, even though the work hadn't been performed. This is important because we found that on the day of the incident during the ISOM startup, there were a number of instruments and equipment that were not functioning properly.
On February 20th, 2005, a company safety manager wrote, "I truly believe we are on the verge of something bigger happening." Then, 3 weeks later, a BP business plan recognized a number of key safety risks, including that TCS or Texas City site kills someone in the next 12 to 18 months. 8 days later, those fears were realized.
Here were these warnings. These audits were sounding very clear warnings. So why weren't they attended to? I think my feeling is that Texas City was virtually paralyzed by the cost-cutting which had occurred at that site, and they were simply unable to respond to those warnings.
There needs to be somebody on the board of directors who can interpret those reports and be in position to drive change effectively.
The CSB's final report recommended that BP appoint an additional non-executive member of the board of directors with specific expertise in refinery operations and process safety.
So the problem at Texas City was that they were essentially blind to this issue of process safety. They were focusing on personal safety.
The CSB concluded that over a period of years, BP managers focused on lowering rates for personal injury, slips and falls, while often disregarding key process safety indicators.
We as members of the travelling public intuitively understand that the numbers of baggage handling injuries really tells us nothing about the likelihood of a major accident, an aircraft crash, and no airline in its right mind is going to try and convince the travelling public of how safe it is by telling you about its workforce injury statistics.
Part of the video demonstrates some of the issues at Texas City around the need for more ethics, pragmatism, independence of thought, and internal standards in decision-making that can harm many companies and many sectors of business. In this last part of the video, some of the things that are mentioned, I'll just read through the list here. A check-the-box mentality, uncompleted work orders closed out, very basic instrumentation, alarms malfunctioning, audits making clear warnings, employees paralyzed, blinded by cost-cutting mentality, tracking slips, trips, and falls, but not process integrity, not heeding leading and lagging indicators. So tell me how the principles of power, the modern doctrine, might have helped in this Texas City incident in terms of the things you mention in the book: ethics, pragmatism, independence of thought, and internal standards.
One of the outcomes of systems thinking is the hierarchy of objectives. We can draw these for individuals, and we can also draw them for organizations. What hierarchy of objectives mean is that what is your ultimate goal? Organizations exist for the satisfaction of the owners. And it takes commercial wealth and social wealth, not just commercial wealth. You see, financial accounting takes care of counts commercial wealth. We compete for commercial wealth, and we ignore social wealth. Social wealth is just as important in achieving the satisfaction of the owners. But how do we create wealth? There are only three processes to create wealth. You either produce wealth for your own consumption, or you produce wealth for the consumption of others and trade, or you produce wealth collectively through associations. What allows you to create wealth is your sovereignty. Organizations also have sovereignty. And their sovereignty is made of their capital, skills, health, and relationships. What allows us to create sovereignty is integrity. So integrity should be the focus of leadership. Leadership means enhancing the integrity of the organization. Not meeting just bottom line, but following the integrity of the organization. And here, the two important parts of the integrity I have broken out: means love and learning.
There's that love word again.
Yes. You have to see love from its broadest perspective. Love means wishing someone life, health, and growth. If you don't love your organization, you have no reason being the leader.
Loving your organization and the people in it.
That's right.
And what you stand for.
And its customers, and its suppliers, and the community beyond. That's right. There is no other way you can be successful if you don't wish life, health, and growth for all those people with whom you are interacting. There is really no other way.
And then finally, let's sum up this incident discussed and how companies can benefit from your training programs in terms of your very simple analogy, which I love, by the way, to making a cup of coffee.
Yes, that section of the book is turned into an animated video called Value Creation and Optimization. It is available on Vimeo. Anyone wants to watch it, they can log on to vimeo.com and then search Value Creation and Optimization, and they can watch it, and they will see a couple of things. Not only it shows you about value creation optimization in a sense that can be applied to all activities, but it shows you how system thinking can actually integrate various disciplines of knowledge, such as engineering, project management, economics, and create a seamless frame of understanding of everything. So this is a promise that gets me very excited about systems thinking. Creating this seamless frame of understanding, integrating all divergent fragments of human knowledge. It has enormous power. Instead of learning one small discipline at a time and not knowing how to apply it. Once you have this seamless frame of understanding, then application becomes that much easier.
Well, thank you very much, Hamid Noorani, for sharing your thoughts with us today. And again, your book, Power of the Modern Doctrine, can be found on the website.
And also on Amazon. And I thank you very much for all the good questions. Thank you, Brian.
Okay, thank you.
Oftentimes, we are called to make decisions that have far-reaching impacts. How can we create an environment or culture that measures the bottom line while keeping the big picture in perspective? Hope for a better future can be acted upon today, and in so many ways by people everywhere. It can start easily with one powerful tool to apply to your situation. We welcome your inquiries into ways we can help you make a difference in your world starting today.